Are you guys ready for chapter 17? Chapter 17, Dark Days. Joris hadn't seen Hendrik for a long time. Ever since Nero had been taken, Hendrik had felt listless until he finally caught a cold and had to stay in bed for weeks. Now he was better again and feeling very pleased because Leendert had left home that day on some mysterious errand. He hated his brother. He'd been able to do exactly as he liked that day, for Leendert hadn't been there to tell on him. He had stayed up late reading by a candle, and then he'd heard the noise of a low-flying plane, and he looked out of the window. As soon as he had seen the little parachutes falling from the plane, he'd run out of the house and across the meadows, climbing fences and jumping ditches. In his excitement, he was not looking where he was going either, and so he collided with Joris. The two foreheads bumped together, and the boys groaned and rubbed the sore spots. Then they laughed. "Did you see that?" asked Hendrik. "See what?" asked Joris cautiously. "The weapon dropping, of course," said Hendrik. "I never thought there'd be one so close to the house. Luckily, Leendert wasn't here." Joris smiled. "Oh, let Hendrik think it was luck. I suppose you noticed it too," Hendrik continued. "But how come you were here in time? The Watchman is farther away." "Ah, I suppose your people had something to do with this?" "Oh, no," said Joris hastily. I just heard a cart creaking." "Oh, there was a cart, was there? Where did it go?" Joris did not know what to say. He knew Hendrik was not a traitor, but he felt sure he could not keep a secret. It's all over now," he said. "We'd better go home. Sorry about your dog, Hendrik." Hendrik said nothing. He kicked at a lump of ice which tinkled in the stillness. "It was Leendert's fault," said Hendrik in a choking voice. "He could very well have asked the Germans for permission to keep Nero. They let him have a motorbike, didn't they? But Leendert hated my dog. He always did. Nero hated him too. The last time Leendert hit Nero, Nero bit him." This thought seemed to give Hendrik some consolation. Joris slapped his arms to get warm. He was chilled through. "Let's go home," he said through chattering teeth. "Come and see me tomorrow. We'll do something. Listen," he added, suddenly anxious to console Hendrik. "When Freya has pups, I'll give you one." "Honest?" asked Hendrik, his face brightening. "Word of truth," said Joris. Hendrik ran home happily. Joris hurried on. It was a good thing he had interrupted Hendrik before he stumbled into the hiding place of the weapons. Joris felt that he had contributed to the cause. He'd been a sort of watchman, guarding the wagon's rear. He was trying to keep himself warm with these proud reflections when his collar was gripped from behind by a rough hand and a voice hissed at him. "So, young man, what business brings you out here?" It was Uncle Cor, of course, who had overtaken him. Dirk Jan was with him. Joris saw no other men. Perhaps they were still in the giant to guard the weapons. Uncle Cor seemed to be very angry, as Joris had feared. "If I'd wanted you around, I would have invited you," he growled. "This isn't a child's game. Next time, you stay in bed." And he shook Joris roughly by the shoulder. Joris felt crushed. He saw Dirk Jan looking reproachfully at him. Or perhaps he just imagined it. He wished he was 14 and Dirk Jan was 10. It wasn't fair. Well, he wouldn't tell them about Hendrik. No, sir. They'd have been in a nice stew if he hadn't been there to send Hendrik home. Perhaps Joris had saved all their lives. They might never know it till they went to heaven, and then they'd be sorry. He crawled into bed, cold and deeply offended. The next day, he had a fever and had to stay in bed. His uncle showed no sympathy. Joris confessed his escapade to Mother in tears. Mother said he'd done wrong, but if he was sorry, she was sure Uncle Cor would forgive him. Joris tried to be sorry, but he spent his time imagining himself rescuing Dirk Jan and Uncle Cor from dangerous situations. In the end, they always said, "Joris, without you, we never could have managed." Unfortunately, he knew that there wasn't the slightest chance of such things happening, and so he finally cried himself to sleep. Soon after the weapon dropping, Uncle Cor left. Before he went, he made his peace with Joris. "I know you didn't mean badly," Uncle Cor said, standing beside Joris, who was fingering the geraniums on the windowsill and watching the girls throwing snowballs. Probably I'd have done the same thing in your place. But we have to be so careful, you see. I had to be severe with you. Joris nodded. Perhaps Uncle Cor felt about him the way he felt about Henrik. He told his uncle what happened that night and how he had sent Henrik home. Uncle Cor listened with flattering attention. Ah, it means Leander Schneiderhans will have heard about the dropping, he said. From what you told me, that boy won't be able to hold his tongue. But it can't do any harm now. The weapons have all found their destination. You handled that very cleverly. Perhaps next time I should let you in on my secrets, said Uncle Cor, and he smiled. It was such a radiant smile that it seemed to penetrate and dissolve all Joris's hard feelings. He flushed and grabbed one of Uncle Cor's hands impulsively. Don't let them catch you, he said. I couldn't bear it. Uncle Cor's face grew grave. That's in God's hands, he said. Then he put his arms around Joris and held him close for a moment. Goodbye, lad, he murmured. God bless you. And he was gone. So here, let me show you guys the photo, or the picture. I shouldn't say photo, but the picture. And again, don't forget, I have to get it close. It's going to go blurry for just a minute. So there. And see the geranium in the window that he was pinching. Okay. Joris never forgot that talk. After Uncle Cor had left, Dirk Jan became normal again. To Joris's relief, Christmas was a quiet day. Father chopped a branch from an evergreen tree and set it up in the living room. Mother hung some Christmas ornaments on it and clipped to the strongest twigs 3 little candles which were left over from the last year. She put extra fuel in the stove and opened the last of her preserves. Father read the Bible stories of Jesus' birth, and they all sang carols. Far away in different parts of Holland, where bombs and cannonades had done their destructive work, homeless people wandering like Joseph and Mary on that first Christmas night. Babies were born in cellars and wrapped in rugs, and the stars in the sky shone as brightly as the first Christmas. After Christmas, the cold intensified. A biting east wind swept over the polders, bringing flurries of snow. The children went skating on the canal and on the frozen lake. The boys pulled Trixie in their sled. Koba and Betsy each took a chair to hold on to and scrambled in outgrown skates of Dirk Jan and Joris. They shrieked with excitement and came back with glowing eyes and red cheeks. Hildebrand borrowed Father's skates, but he could only use them after dark. Then he skated by himself on the deserted lake, with only the scratching of his iron blades on the ice to disturb the silence. Sometimes Rena and Engel came to visit the Watchman, bringing their skates. Then Mother made it into a party. She served sugar beet pulp with whipped sugar beet foam, which looked just like peaches and cream, and they all played games. But the war cast a shadow even on such merry memories. The papers were filled with death notices of people who had simply not been able to get enough to eat. Besides food, the greatest need in Holland was fuel. Armies of shivering people left their homes at night and went searching for things to burn. Many families had already sacrificed their furniture to keep the stoves going. Now they attacked the unused railway tracks and chopped off the heavy wooden sleepers, which they dragged home. They hacked whole pieces of asphalt off the roads. They took wooden gates and signposts and park benches, and whenever they could manage it, they chopped down trees. Holland began to look as shorn as a boy with a crew cut. These were difficult days for Mother. The mill was crowded, and the work took twice as long because she did not have the proper tools. It was also hard to make the food stretch. The rations had been halved because the waterways were frozen, which stopped the only remaining transportation. But it was a cozy time too. Hildebrand and Father had long discussions after meals, drinking Mother's acorn coffee and smoking self-rolled cigarettes made with Father's homegrown tobacco. Mother used every minute of daylight to clean or sew, and the little girls played quietly at her feet. Joris and Dirk Jan listened to the arguments of the men and put in their own comments now and again. Father would sometimes say, "Oh, be quiet. You're too young to understand this." But Hildebrand always took them seriously. "Now, no, let them think," he'd say. "That's good for them. They're going to have their part to play in building a new Holland. The more they think and argue, the better." It made Dirk Jan and Joris feel important. When the sun shone through the little windows, forming the cigarette smoke into white phantoms and setting glass and china sparkling, the little living room seemed an ark of peace. But Freya's bark would suddenly interrupt it. Hildebrand would disappear up the stairs with a few strides of his long legs. Mother would clear away the extra plate with trembling fingers, waiting for the knock on the door. And then it was usually only the paper, or a woman looking for food, or a farmer to speak to father. In the evenings, when no visitors were expected because of curfew, the family sat around the kitchen stove. The only light would come from a thread of yarn dipped in some oil that floated in the glass of water. It was all they had now. Mother could not possibly sew, nor could anyone read. So they told stories and sang. Hildebrand had a good tenor voice. It harmonized well with Mother's soprano and Father's bass. He knew many songs which he taught to the others. The children sang the refrains. Hildebrand had read so much, he had all sorts of interesting tales to tell. Years afterwards, when the children were used to plenty of light and warmth and freedom and had televisions to look at, they remembered those evenings with nostalgia. It was around this time that Father had a visit from the Poldermasters. They were discussing some improvements Father had suggested. Mr. Decker, a modern millwright, had applied the new knowledge gained through the manufacture of airplanes to the making of more efficient mill wings. Father had proposed that the Watchman should acquire these Decker wings. The Poldermasters discussed this with him, but they were all three cautious farmers and they balked at the money. "You are foolish," Father warned them. "You'll never be so rich again. The cities are bringing their wealth in return for food, bringing you their wealth in return for food. This is the time to do it." To Father's astonishment and dismay, they told him that it would be a waste of money, for they had already decided to electrify the mill. Later that evening, when the Poldermasters had left, Father discussed the visit in front of the stove. "They are bent on scrapping the Watchman," he said sadly. "I think Schneiderhans has been boasting of the superiority of the Norderer pump. No one likes being called old-fashioned." "It would be a shame," said Hildebrand. He had gotten to love the mill, and Father was finding a helper in him. At first, he had thought that such a bookish person could not learn anything so practical, but Hildebrand proved to be quite dexterous, and Father was beginning to rely on him, or dexterous. "I know," Father sighed. "Windmills have meant so much to Holland," mused Hildebrand. "They made us a first-rate power." "How?" asked Dirk-Jan. "Well, we had a flat country open to the skies. When Lee Water improved our windmill, he really created the first industrial machine before steam had been invented. We had sawmills, oil mills, paper mills, and many others. The great Tsar Peter of Russia came to Zaandam to learn how to build ships. Our mastery at sea was due to the quantity of ships we had because of our mills, and now they want to scrap them. I don't think our farmers waste any time thinking of Holland's greatness," said Father with a sad smile. "They want to save money and trouble." "Well," said Hildebrand, "I'm surprised that the Norderer farmers haven't been in trouble yet with the present scarcity of electricity." Father sighed. "Polder mills have priority," he explained. Mother and the boys had listened in stricken silence. What would happen to them if the mill was electrified? Father would not stay on at the Watchman. They knew that. He was a windmiller, born and bred. He would never be happy handling an electric motor. It meant leaving. And to the Verhagens, whose roots were deep in this particular spot of the earth, that meant a tearing up which would never stop hurting. Joris wanted to pray about it. But to whom? God was busy with the war. Joris did not want to distract his attention for fear of that the Germans might win. And Our Lady, what would she know about machines? Then he remembered Saint Victor, the patron saint of mills, and he knew whom to pray to. This was an interesting story about Saint Victor, but he had forgotten it. Now remember about prayer and who we pray to, right? There's only one that we pray to. Father began to tell us, "Father, tell us again about Saint Victor," he begged. Yes, a story," clamored the girls, leaving their dolls and gathering around Father's knees. Father was trying to knot a fishnet, a difficult task in the dim light. So he willingly let it drop and said, "All right, then." He pushed his forefinger against Trixie's nose and began. "You know, St. Victor lived in Marseille in the 3rd century. His feast day is July 21st. He was a soldier in the Roman army. Then he became a Christian and a corn miller. In those days, windmills had only 2 wings." "How only 2?" asked Koba. "Well, just one straight stick, which turned around its middle, like this." Father grabbed the pencil, which stuck out of Hildebrand's breast pocket, and twisted it around his finger. He was a saintly miller. He never cheated, and he was always praying. So the devil came to tempt him. "I'm scared of the devil," said Betsy, putting her hands over her ears. Koba nudged her. "Don't be silly. It's only a story." Betsy's hands went down. "Poor devil," said Father. "He hadn't much of a chance with St. Victor, for St. Victor dreamed of a mill with wings in the shape of a cross. When he woke up, he immediately set to work putting the other 2 wings on the mill, and after that, the devil stayed away." "What happened to St. Victor then?" asked Joris. "Oh, he destroyed heathen idols and was condemned to be ground up in his own mill. But the mill refused to grind, so the soldiers cut his head off instead. Then they heard the angels singing, 'Victor, you have won.'" "Were they German soldiers?" asked Koba, awed. "No, Roman ones, but it came to the same thing." "I'm not scared of the devil," announced Trixie suddenly. "I'm not scared of a wolf either. I just huff and I puff and I blow them all down." Hildebrand took her on his knees. "You and I," he said, "we will conquer the world." "Will you marry me?" asked Trixie. "But you have a husband already," Hildebrand reminded her in a shocked voice. "Oh, no, I lost him," said Trixie. "You lost him?" "Yes, he fell out of my pocket. I couldn't find him. So will you marry me?" "I'll have to think it over," promised Hildebrand. "That's an important decision." "It's children's bedtime," announced Mother. "Only a little more minute," argued Trixie, leaning back luxuriously against Hildebrand's waistcoat. "No little minute, you rascal. Look how sweetly Koba and Betsy are going." "Oh, well, if you're going to be cross," said Trixie, slipping off Hildebrand's knees and taking Mother's outstretched hand. "Just when I was comfortable," she complained. But as she left the kitchen, the others heard her say, "We're having a cozy time, Mama. We'll think of it when we die, won't we?" So that is the end of chapter 17. So chapter 18 is the dikes. I will see you guys there.